So today we're going to be checking out an interview with Kazutoyo Maehiro, who is the director of Final Fantasy Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles. He talks about the Enhanced Edition's new features, including the new addition of voice acting, as well as why they decided to bring Tactics back and more. So if any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button, subscribe, and let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Doing even just one of those things helps out the channel so much, and it's always greatly appreciated. So for those of you who have watched my previous videos on Tactics, you will know that I don't have a ton of experience with Final Fantasy Tactics. I've only played a little bit of the Tactics in my day when I was a kid. I didn't get all that far into it. So this experience of learning about the Enhanced Edition, covering the articles, and finally playing that when it comes out in September is going to be a brand new, fresh experience for me. And I'm pretty excited because a lot of people refer to Tactics as having one of the best stories in all of Final Fantasy. Now, as far as footage goes, because I don't have a huge chunk of Tactics footage at my disposal, and for whatever reason some of the Tactics trailers trigger the YouTube copyright system, I'm just going to be using random footage of Final Fantasy games throughout the series, so apologies if that bothers you. But getting to this interview, this comes to us from Duncan Heaney of Square Enix, who sat down with Maehiro to talk about the Ivalice Chronicles. And the first thing they ask him is, why now bring back Tactics? Maehiro would go on to say, a few years ago, certain circumstances led me to play the original Tactics game. It was my first time playing the game since it first released all those years ago, and I got to experience its brilliance all over again, from its outstanding design that still holds up today even among modern games, to its deep narrative. However, there was no way to play the game on the current generation of consoles. I really wanted the younger generation of players who didn't get to experience the original release to be able to play this incredible game. That's why we started developing this title, which I think is really brilliant. Again, I kind of liken Square Enix to Capcom, where, Capcom was in a really dark period, but now they've really found their footing and they're releasing remasters, remakes, bringing back games and franchises that we thought might have been dead, like Onimusha, and updating them for modern audiences. And I think Square Enix is kind of on the path to doing that. And to recognize, like, hey, Tactics is a really popular entry in our franchise and a lot of people want to enjoy it, but there's not an easy way to access it. This is actually really smart. And again, it's perfect for people like me who may have played a tiny bit as I was a kid, but now I'm going to have access to the not only original version, but an enhanced version to finally play it nowadays with all of the quality of life improvements, voice acting, all of that good stuff. So this is a really good call. And I hope that Square Enix continues to look at their backlog and realize we've got a lot of gems in here. Let's bring them back, whether it's a big full-scale remake or something in the vein of the Ivalice Chronicles or the long-rumored Final Fantasy IX remake. It's always great to bring these games back and introduce them to a new audience that might actually appreciate it. Up next, they ask Maehiro what was their main focus when crafting the enhanced version of this game. He would go on to say, the original game is around 30 years old, and no matter how good a game it is, simply remastering or porting it wouldn't be enough to convey that greatness to a new generation of players. Our main focus was to keep everything that was great about the original game intact, but also working to further improve the game to adapt the game to the current era. For example, revamping the controls and UI, as well as adding full voice acting to enhance player immersion. So rather than having the game run on an emulator or produce a remaster or remake, the approach we took was to reinvent Tactics. And again, I do think this is the right approach. Now, I was under the impression that when this was leaked many years ago, it would be a full-scale remake. New graphics, maybe some changes to the story, voice acting, but I think they found a nice middle ground, because one thing that's going to happen when you're making remasters or remakes or enhanced editions is that you're not always going to please everybody. And there are definitely a section of fans who want just the original game. Maybe some improvements here and there. I see it all the time when people talk about Final Fantasy VII. They're like, a remake is cool, but I just wanted the original game, improved graphics, updated music, but I still wanted everything else to stay the same. So you're kind of getting that with this Tactics Enhanced Edition. And they also don't seem to be changing so much that it becomes unrecognizable, and they're just making all of the proper changes that you would need for today's gaming audiences, like quality of life stuff, rebalancing the game, changing the UI, just making it a little bit more accessible without drastically changing what people would come to expect from it. But you're also just making it much easier of an experience to get into. And adding voices is a really big change, which we will discuss a little bit later. Up next, they talk to Maehiro about why Tactics to this day is still one of the most popular and highly requested titles from Square Enix. Maehiro goes on to say, there are many aspects of the game that are highly regarded by players, such as the in-depth character customization through the job system, or the compelling narrative that incorporates political intrigue. But I think the reason that this game is so highly regarded is that it brings all these elements into harmony in the context of a Final Fantasy title. There have been lots of games released in the tactical RPG genre, but Tactics stands as one of a kind among them. I think this harmonization is why Tactics holds a lasting place in players' hearts, rather than simply being another game among many. Now again, not having tons of experience playing the game myself, when researching it and hearing to people that love Tactics, one of the things they always talk about was that job system. Grinding out a job, getting to a new one, and figuring out how you're going to implement it in battle. But also that story, and based on what I do know of the story, it is pretty dark. It's deep, and it was one of the more mature Final Fantasy titles. Now, that's not to say that the Final Fantasies before that weren't mature. FF7, FF6, almost every Final Fantasy was dealing with some pretty heavy, dark themes and some form of political intrigue. But it really feels like Tactics, for whatever reason, just went full bore and said, look, we're going to tell a pretty dark, deep story. We're not going to shy away from the politics of what this world is. It's going to be kind of violent, and we're just going to go with it. And I think by doing that, it really helped it stand out, not just among the other tactical games like Maehiro mentions, but also Final Fantasy. Up next, they ask Maehiro what were the biggest challenges they faced when crafting the Ivalice Chronicles. He would go on to say, there were a number of major challenges, but all of them stemmed from the fact that the master data and source code from the original game no longer existed. This isn't to say that they were mishandled or poorly managed or anything like that. Keeping that kind of data wasn't a normal thing to do at the time. In those days, we didn't have the sort of robust resource management tools that exist today. And on top of that, the production workflow for the game was such that the Japanese version was produced first, and then we would create localized versions by overriding the data with that of other languages, including English. There was also no such thing as online patches or updates, so unless there was any major reason to do something different, once you made the game, that was it. So I think it's fair to say that developing this game without any master data or source code was the biggest challenge. And I'm happy they brought that up because I learned many years ago that a lot of developers did this back in the day. They would make their game, they would burn it to their CDs, they would sell it, and that was it. Very few companies actually thought to save the source code for their games because, like Maehiro says, why? People back then didn't really have the foresight of like, oh, in the future, we're gonna digitize these games even further, and then we're gonna be able to sell them again. Once that game was made, it was finished and it was out there. And I think even some of the earlier Final Fantasies, like Final Fantasy VIII in particular, is one of those example cases where they made the game and then did not keep the source code. But what I did not know is what Maehiro mentions here, in that they overwrote data for each language of the game. That is insane to me. And nowadays, it's not really an issue. You keep your source code, you update it with patches and updates. If you want to re-release a new version, you can. It's pretty easy. But back in the day, take for example like Street Fighter, they were releasing new editions of Street Fighter seemingly like every week. Street Fighter 2, tons of different editions, Turbo Edition, Super Championship Ultra, Mega Mix Edition, they had a lot. And that was how you had to update your game. Release a new one. So how exactly would Maehiro and the team solve that problem? He goes on to say, put simply, by sheer force. He then proceeds to laugh. We analyzed a number of existing versions of the game and reconstructed the programming of the original, but there were also times where we played the original game and it worked out by feel alone. The entire process was the result of cumulative hard work. On the one hand, working to implement new features, while behind the scenes our work was similar to porting an old arcade game to the Nintendo. The staff who worked on this game were real lifesavers. I can't thank them enough. You hear these kinds of stories all the time about how companies will take like a mobile version of a game and they'll use that for the basis of a remaster or a PC version of the game. But to analyze and really take the time to look at the different versions of Tactics and be like, okay, we're gonna have to rebuild this source code bit by playing through these other versions, that sounds like a nightmare. And it explains why it took so long for it to come out. This was leaked many years ago, along with Final Fantasy IX. And for them to just now announce like, hey, it's coming out in September, you finally understand why it took them so long. They had to rebuild everything. Up next, they ask Maehiro about the addition of voice acting, but also an updated script for the game. He goes on to say, "Nowadays, it has become the norm for games to have fully voiced dialogue, but when the original Tactics was released, this wasn't the case. Of course, there are huge benefits to having voice acting in a game. It allows you to portray the feelings of the characters accurately, and it increases the level of immersion in the story. So having this game be fully voiced was a necessity. On the other hand, the dialogue in the original game was written to be read by the player, so just having it be read out by a voice actor as is would have felt quite unnatural. So with help from Yasumi Matsuno, who wrote the script for the original game, we tweaked the dialogue to make it better suited for voice. I think we have kept the overall feel of the original intact while creating more natural spoken dialogue, which offers an even greater level of immersion into the story." I really appreciate that they took the time not only to cast people and add voice acting into the game, but to actually go back and adjust the script to make sure everything sounded right. Because just based on watching playthroughs of older Final Fantasy games that don't have voice acting, a lot of times the content creator will create voices and read the dialogue out loud, and sometimes it sounds great and other times it's like, hang on, this doesn't sound quite natural, or you're tripping over your words. Because it was never meant to actually have voices intact, you're just meant to read it as the player in your head. So the fact that they actually took the time to tweak all that stuff to make sure that the voice actors had an easier time reading this dialogue, but for it to also sound and feel natural, I really appreciate. And I'm super excited to check out this game with voice acting. I appreciate the older Final Fantasies. I loved reading. I would always create voices in my head of what I thought the characters sounded like, but to have definitive versions of these characters reading to me and emoting and having me feel the proper emotions like my hero says, I think is really important. And it's also one of those features that I think appeals to younger and newer audiences. A lot of younger people might not want to read. This game has subtitles, are you crazy? So having voice acting is a really big quality of life thing in my opinion. Up next, they ask my hero about the iconic visuals of the game, and I'll summarize this very briefly, but his main focus is that they didn't want to alter the game's art style or graphics too much. They really just wanted to clean it up and accentuate what made them so great. So they kept a lot of the flashier effects that you would see in modern games to a bare minimum, but focused on really increasing that resolution to make sure that it looked as crisp as it could. So in the end, you're still experiencing the original Tactics art style and graphics, but it's just cleaned up in a way that feels and looks pretty good. Up next, they ask him about the UI, and it's a very similar situation to those quality of life things that we mentioned earlier in the video, but you really just want players to pick up a controller and just play intuitively. And the original Tactics, by today's standards, might be a bit complicated, might be a bit harder to play. So cleaning up the graphics and the UI, making things a little easier to read and understand is a really big deal. So it's still the same game, but they're taking those core concepts and just making sure that modern gamers can actually feel comfortable approaching this game and playing it. But of course, if you want the original, that's still there too. He also does go on to say that in the addition of voice acting and tweaking the script, they've added new conversations between some of the characters. And by doing so, they're able to flesh out the characters and their relationships even more. And don't worry, all of this stuff was handled by the game's original writer and director, Yasumi Matsuno. So it's not like somebody new came in and added dialogue that might not fit with a character. So that'll be something to keep an eye out. If you've played the original Tactics, you might come across something where it's like, hey, I don't remember this exact conversation from the original. So that's going to be a nice little treat for a lot of the OG fans. Now this next question, this is a big one. I've seen some people ask about this and complain. There is a version called Tactics War of the Lions, which has an updated script, updated everything. A lot of people really enjoy that game. So some people were like, why didn't they just take that game and update it instead of the original? Well, my hero goes on to say, I and other members of this dev team were not directly involved in the War of the Lions, but I do believe that the content in that game did fully meet expectations for players at the time. However, as we looked back on everything nearly 30 years later, during the creation of this game, we asked ourselves what our team, those who created the original Tactics, could do to bring this game to a new generation of players. It was through considering this question that we came to the conclusion that the most appropriate path for us was to pay respect to the original game's experience and recreate that in the best form possible. So basically, it just kind of sounds like he's saying, why take something that was so well received and try to improve upon it? That version exists. If you want to go and play it, I think you probably still can find ways to do so. And that team in particular probably felt like they did everything they could. So why not take the original Tactics, add some stuff from War of the Lions into it via script, but clean up the original game as people remembered it and bring that to a new audience. That kind of makes sense to me. And from my understanding, War of the Lions still holds up pretty well today. And we will end on the very last question that they asked Maehiro, and that is, why include the original tactics in this package? He would go on to say, among fans of the original game, there will be those who believe that the game doesn't need a lot of embellishment. To be honest, I felt this way about a number of remastered titles in the past. So there was no doubt in our minds that alongside the enhanced version, which is more in line with the current era and more accessible to newcomers, we should also include the classic version that is based on the original build of the game. The classic version isn't just a direct reproduction of the original game, however. We added some quality of life features such as an autosave and fixed a lot of bugs, allowing players to get the same feel as they did from the original game, but play comfortably on current platforms. Fans of the original game will still be satisfied with the gameplay experience. Now, it's also worth noting that Square Enix says that the classic version included in the Ivalice Chronicles will feature the translation that we saw in the War of the Lions. And again, it really is just kind of the best of both worlds here. Update the game for those who want it, which, let's be honest here, anytime you take a classic game and you update it in some fashion, whether it's a remaster or a remake, you're gonna have people who don't like it and they just want that original experience the way that they had when they were younger and they played it. So you're getting both. You get that enhanced version, but if you want that classic version, which does have the updated script, that's there as well. So it's kind of a win-win situation here. You have a game that is going to be hopefully appealing and accessible to a newer generation of people, or people like me who grew up with Final Fantasy but maybe didn't get fully into tactics can now experience it in the enhanced form or in the classic version, which, you know, might be worth the second playthrough. But you will satisfy those people who are like, no, I want the OG, I don't care about the enhanced, just give me what I want.
Give me what I want!
But I also think that those players will probably appreciate a lot of the quality of life stuff they added to the classic version, including that autosave and bug fixes. So this is cool. Again, I really hope that Square Enix kind of looks at their back catalog and goes, you know what we did with Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles, we can do with this game, or we can do with that game. It's something that does take money and effort, but it's not something that's going to take super long like the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy has. And you're offering a package that should satisfy old players who want the OG, but also new people who want to just kind of dip their toe in and see what the fuss was about. So, Square Enix, I do have a request. If you could look at your back catalog of PlayStation 2 games and find a certain title by the name of The Bouncer and give me The Bouncer Chronicles, that would be amazing, because I'm like one of 3 people on this planet, maybe 2, that genuinely loved The Bouncer. And growing up, all I wanted was either a sequel or a remaster to that game. There's a lot of quality of life stuff you can add to improve that game, fixes to gameplay, add online co-op. I would be eternally grateful if you guys could bring back that game, because I loved it so much. I really love the characters. I love the combat. I loved being able to, as a kid, pick a really cool character and have 2 other characters by my side beating up bad guys in real time. I love the soundtrack, I love the locations, I loved how cinematic and action movie blockbustery that game felt, and I think it deserves some TLC. Let's be honest, that's never gonna happen, but I can dream. So with that being said, that is the video. Let me know in the comments down below, what did you think of this interview with Maehiro about Tactics, the Ivalice Chronicles? Will you be picking the game up physical or digital, because it will have a physical release as well? And let me know, are you an OG Tactics player or are you new, and which version do you plan on playing for your first playthrough, classic or enhanced? I'm Curious Corduroy. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.